my medication history, lots of very long list. Before I decided to have surgery, I tried virtually everything, a lot of different medications and treatments as well. The very first one they put me on, like many of you, is prednisone, which on the plus side, it definitely eases the symptoms, kind of stabilizes you, gets everything under control a little bit. But the downside is it has really, really nasty side effects. The worst one I experienced with it was just the moon face and basically just a big fat head altogether. I had lost a ton of weight from being sick. I didn't gain any on prednisone. I looked like Mr. Mackey from South Park. I just had this big fat head and this little tiny body because I was just like a stick figure. And that wasn't very pleasant. I think the highest dose I ever was on for when I was taking it at its peak, I think was 60 milligrams a day, but I'm not 100% certain. I remember taking 40 for a long time, a second time around a few years later, but I think 60 was the highest initial dose I ever took. And that one hit pretty badly. The next one was probably joint pain. Nothing too severe, but just, especially when I'd wake up, like the first several hours of being awake, my ankles and my knees, I don't know if pain is even the right word. Like they just didn't want to move. It wasn't so much pain as maybe just stiffness and discomfort. Didn't feel great, I guess is just a kind of an umbrella term you could use. And that was about all I got with those. I didn't get like really, really odd appetite swings because I was still pretty unhealthy to begin with, so I can't really say for certain. Same thing with like any kind of irritability or mood swings. I think you're just kind of in a bad mood, just generally. So it's hard to say that any of that was from prednisone. I guess I could just say I didn't notice any difference from that to just what I was ordinarily going through anyway. So probably joint pain and definitely the moon face were the two worst things I experienced with that. And some of these were so long ago, I don't remember exactly the timeline or how long I was on some of them. But the first kind of long-term treatment option they gave me was Remicade, and I went in and took. There was some kind of conflict with the paperwork. It took like an extra 3 weeks for me to finally go in there and get my first infusion, but that was pretty straightforward. I sat there for just about 3-ish hours. I think it was a little under 3 hours. And I was a little nervous to start, but nothing really seemed out of the ordinary, and it didn't hurt or anything. They just run an IV and just kind of put the medication through you, and you just sit there. And it went just fine. I think I took 2 introductory phases, I think they call it. I'm a little hazy on this. It's been so long, but I took those 2. They were just fine. I think between that and the prednisone, I was already noticing I was feeling a little bit better. Still not very well, but just more energy in general. I wasn't so tired or just kind of like glued to the couch. I could get up and do a little bit more those first 2 weeks. And then my first kind of big adventure, noteworthy events on medications came on, I don't know what they call it, but after the introductory phase, when they increased the drop rate, they'd given me Benadryl. And actually, years later, when I'm about to tell you, it's not 100% certain that it wasn't the Benadryl that bothered me as well, because it always left me. I always kind of felt like I had a headache after those first 2 phases, just nothing too severe. But that's another thing we don't know for sure. But anyway, so I went in for that 3rd dose, and I want to say it was maybe like 40 minutes in or something like that. They increased the drop rate, and I was just getting into like that kind of nice, medicated sleep. And all of a sudden, I kind of woke back up, and it was not normal from the first 2. I had kind of just drifted off on those first 2. I don't know if I fully fell asleep, but definitely the time went faster than it felt sitting there. And I just didn't feel good. I woke up and I was like wide awake, and I couldn't figure out what was going on. It was really uncomfortable, and I was still kind of hazy out of it as well. And I started to notice that as I was breathing, I wasn't taking full breaths. Like I would just take a deep breath, and it just felt like my lungs or like my airway would just pinch off before I got full breath of air. And I started to notice that, so I started taking deep breaths to kind of gauge what's going on, and my breaths were getting shorter and shorter and shorter. And then I started to realize that like my heart rate monitor was just going off and beeping furiously. And I started to realize I wasn't breathing, or my breathing was getting shorter and shorter. I was losing, my airway was closing up or something. And I was looking for that little nurse's button that they always give you, and I never had to ring it before. But anyway, I was able to find it, and I was just starting to kind of feel like I was maybe getting close to blacking out or fainting. Like everything was just getting a little bit kind of blurry and fading. And then I remember the nurses, like they all rushed in there, and even the like my regular GI doctor was there as well. I vaguely remember him saying, are you sure he's okay? And they said yes. And then I started to kind of come back to, and my breath was coming back, and they said I was like bright red. So what they figured is just I went into anaphylactic shock, which I hear is not that odd or unheard of, but the technician told me in the 15 years that he'd done it, he'd never seen somebody go through the first doses with no problems and then get it, just like halfway through the treatment. Usually you either get it or you don't. So he said that was unusual. But needless to say, that was not a fun experience. We tried it 2 more times just to see if that was maybe a fluke, or they also thought possibly if I hadn't eaten, if it had been like if I went in there on an empty stomach, which I hadn't, but they thought maybe just if I didn't eat enough, I was willing to give it another shot. But the nurses stayed with me, and I made sure to stay awake the whole time. So even at just the slightest onset of my airway closing up, I let them know, like, it's happening again. So we didn't reach that point where it was scary. But ultimately, that was not going to be a long-term solution. So somewhere along that line, in that timeline, I was also taking a medication called dipentum, which is, I don't remember exactly what it does, but it does something where it kind of like coats your stomach. It's more of a maintenance thing. Like once you've seen some improvement, you can be on it long term. So they gave me some options to try some other things, but at the time I decided I wanted to go ahead and just, I was doing a gluten-free, dairy-free thing at the time as well, is what they recommended. So I wanted to try to stick with that and maybe just slowly add foods back and, try to be careful with my diet and just continue taking the dipentum and see where that would get me. And at least for the short term, it seemed to be going pretty well. Unfortunately, I was young and not so experienced as I thought I was with the illness. I kind of had this attitude of, they'd given me this medication and I'd gotten better, and that was going to be that. Because usually every time you get sick, that's what you do. You go to the doctor or you take some medicine, they give you something, you get better, you move on with your life. I thought this was no different at the time. I just thought it was a little bit more serious. Unfortunately, that's not the case, and that's not at all where this story ends. But that was kind of the first phase of medications for me. Unfortunately, I discontinued the dipentum just kind of on my own. I thought that the diet was going really well. My doctor, at the time, I didn't think he was a very good doctor because he seemed like he wasn't that attentive. Again, just I had always experienced, you go to the doctor, they tell you what's wrong, they give you some kind of a treatment, and you get better. He would give me a lot of choices and very kind of vague answers. At the time, I didn't realize that that's actually a very good thing with this illness, kind of letting me, allowing him to treat me the way that I wanted to be treated. But, again, at the time, I didn't really understand or realize that. So I was kind of turned off by that approach. So I stopped taking all the medications. And it was the dipentum at that point. And slowly, I stayed on the strict diet, but I slowly started trying to add foods back to kind of gauge, if they would hurt or not, thinking that if it was just a one-time thing, I could eliminate it right back and just heal up. I did that for about a year, and it seemed to go pretty well. I didn't have any major episodes. And then I don't remember the exact. I remember May 11th, 2011. I either had a doctor's appointment scheduled or something, but I remember that date specifically. But at some point in May, I went into a major flare-up after doing that, and I had kind of disconnected from that doctor. So that found me in trouble, and that's where I'm going to leave off here with this part, kind of leaving suspense there before we get on to the rest of it back in 2011. So until next time, I'll get on with the story. I'll see you later.